if you're planting trees, those trees are also very good at fixing carbon from the atmosphere. The problem is that trees can burn down, they can be cut down, they can die, right? We're about solving business problems using this technology. And
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Jonathan Rackoff, VP and Head of Global Policy at the HBAR Foundation. The HBAR Foundation acts as an integrated force multiplier to help builders and creators overcome the challenges of bringing their ideas to market. Jonathan, I'm so excited to have you on the show, not only because obviously it's different from our usual guests, but in terms of kind of the whole ecosystem of blockchain and the different networks and the different protocols and applications that are being built. There's so much going on that it's amazing to have someone like yourself to really make sense of it, but also kind of give us and share the exciting, I guess, the applications of this type of technology that you've seen, especially in the spaces that you're particularly interested in and pushing for. So before we get into HBAR and what you're working on today, what were you doing before you joined the company?
Well, first, thank you for having me on the show. You do a lot of these, and I've been a fan for a long time. So sure, as you said, I'm the head of global policy at the HBAR Foundation, and that is the basically VC impact arm of the Hedera blockchain network. Before that, I was at Coinbase on a secondment. I'm a lawyer by training, and I had been representing Coinbase from the outside on sustainability and ESG matters. And they asked me to come in and help build some cool infrastructure, and that was an eye-opening experience. It brought me into this blockchain world and all the amazing things you can accomplish with the technology.
Yeah. It was so exciting to think about your past experience. Before you even jump into what excited you about blockchain and what in particular you're trying to solve, it's interesting and talk about your past experience and almost your past lifetime as not an entrepreneur, but somebody involved in not only the sustainability space, but policy and things along with that nature.
Yeah. So as I said, I come at this from probably the most boring background of all your guests, right? A traditional lawyer. I spent 10 years as a litigator. I was an appellate lawyer with a big DC law firm, and thought that was great, right? But then I had this cool opportunity to go into the Obama administration. I went to the White House Office of Management and Budget and ran the domestic policy regulatory portfolio, as well as some ethics and compliance matters. And then from there went to the Environmental Protection Agency at DC and helped defend the Obama climate policy agenda. And then from there, I had thought perhaps I would have a exciting job in the Hillary Clinton administration, but we all know how that went, right? And I moved on back to private practice, but this time not as a litigator, but as an advisor to mostly tech companies on a range of policy and regulatory matters. And so that was around 2017, 2018. And this was when, at least from my point of view, the cool blockchain activities were really just beginning. And so had this great opportunity to look at the landscape and thankfully pick some really cool clients. And as I said, one of those was Coinbase. But while I was there, I just didn't realize that organizations like the HBAR Foundation or the Hedera network, which were based on, I had heard about Hedera, had heard of some of the cool new up and coming companies, but candidly, my head just wasn't in it, right? But when I finished my work at Coinbase, wrapped the secondment in the ordinary course, I met a very cool guy named Wes Geisenberger who reached out sort of out of the blue to tell me all of the amazing things that the folks at Hedera were doing with respect to climate and sustainability and ESG, and spent about 6 months trying to kind of arm twist me to come on board. And you got to give it to him. He's smart and passionate and persuasive, and ultimately decided to make that jump and haven't looked back.
It's incredible to think about now this whole kind of network. I don't even know, maybe a network or kind of recipe for what sustainability is going to look like, involving so many different components, politics, technology, and obviously cooperation and corporations and things like that. When we think about, or even if you could kind of paint a picture for the audience, how policy and the intricate details of when a piece of legislation comes out how does that have an impact on corporations? When does that interpretation start? And when do these companies start adapting to what is being, say, whether it's with regulation or whatever is going to be implemented? What's that process like then? And how tied are companies to what those policies will be before they even go into effect?
Sure. So obviously it depends on the company and what sort of industry or sector they're operating in. If you're an early stage company or mature company, your resources are obviously quite different in terms of how you can respond to the regulatory landscape. most companies are just trying to comply with whatever the rules happen to be at the time. But, in a world like ours in the blockchain space, and also in the climate policy and sustainability ESG spaces, there's so much change happening that companies that depend on these sectors for regulatory clarity, they really have to be pretty plugged in, right? You have to understand where the legal landscape is moving to the extent that's possible, and where it might be possible to move the landscape to nudge it in the right direction. People like me, with my background and role, we did the best that we can to help shape what the landscape ultimately looks like.
Yeah. Thinking about blockchain and even before jumping into its kind of implementation in this whole web, how have companies been, and even in governments, how has this ecosystem revolved in terms of sustainability and making sustainable choices? And also there's certain credits that are involved, and there's a lot of people pushing for more sustainable practices, but not all companies can have it. But there's a certain intricate system that I'm interested to hear your explanation of it, on how companies are actually able to hit these sustainability targets, but how they're able to also offload them as well.
Sure. So in the standard corporate sustainability space, you're going to have increasingly senior ranked people, typically a chief sustainability officer, but it could be someone else with a different title that performs the same roles. And it's their job to try and ensure that the company is doing two things: minimizing for the most part, its environmental impact. There are other things that CSOs care about, but let's just suppose we're talking about the environment for the moment. And often that means climate. Doesn't mean only climate, but that's one of the largest concerns. The carbon footprint of a company could be their water use efficiency. It could be how they deal with their trash. It could be many things, but climate and energy consumption are really key worries for many companies. And so they're very concerned to bring those impacts down as much as they can, right? They're also concerned about how they communicate to the public, right? So if you're a publicly traded company, as many in the space are beginning to learn, the SEC and other financial regulatory entities in the United States care quite a bit about whether or not you are communicating truthfully and accurately, to the best of your knowledge, with due diligence, what it is that you're doing with respect to sustainability and many other things, right? So if I say, as the chief sustainability of company X, that my carbon footprint is a certain place, and I'm going to bring it down within 10 years to some lower figure, I better have a plan for doing that and be able to justify why I made those claims, right? And so a chief sustainability officer is focused on those two things: bringing down their impact and communicating clearly and accurately to the public. And they can do that in a variety of different ways, right? They can issue an annual sustainability report, an annual ESG report, a climate impact report. There are lots of different names. There isn't a lot of standardization, but the point is they're trying to communicate to their stakeholders accurately about what their company's impact on the environment is and what they're doing to bring that impact lower, right? And so it is not always possible for a company to lower their impact as quickly or as much as they would like to, right? So in my world, we call, at least in the climate space, we call those companies with hard to abate emissions, right? So if you're Exxon and your business is fossil fuels, there's only so much you can do, right? Some companies like Amazon, for example, put a lot of energy into sustainability, but they have a brick and mortar footprint. They have physical supply chains, packages moving from place to place, right? So it's always going to be a challenge to bring down the emissions profile of that activity as much as you might like, right? And so one of the things that we do at the HBAR Foundation is look at blockchain-based solutions to help companies both communicate what it is that they're doing with respect to sustainability, but also to focus on the emissions or climate or carbon offsets that sometimes companies want to purchase to compensate for what they're unable to do.
Yeah. And how does that mechanically work with blockchain now? And how is it different than before? What was the incumbent kind of process before? And why is this? I don't know if better is the word for it.
So let's just take the offset world. We can broaden it as in your wisdom, however you like. But in the offset world, typically companies have been faced with a pretty hard choice. They have emissions that they can't abate. They can't lower their footprint below some threshold, but they want to do more than simply emit all this additional carbon into the atmosphere. And so they go to the market and they can buy what are called carbon credits, right? And called the voluntary carbon market. We call it the voluntary carbon market, the VCM, to distinguish it from some cap and trade compliance markets. For example, the emissions trading scheme in Europe, the EU ETS, right? Put that aside. In the voluntary market, you go and buy carbon credits that generally reflect 1 ton of carbon removed from the atmosphere, or carbon dioxide equivalent. So you could have methane and other gases, but generally greenhouse gases reflecting 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent brought down from the atmosphere, removed from the atmosphere, reflects 1 carbon credit. The problem is that there hasn't been a lot of standardization, right? The scientific methodologies that carbon project developers have used to issue those credits have been, well, I'm not going to suggest that they're also terrible. There have been some high profile examples of methodologies that have been proven or shown to be weaker than we would like them to be, right? And so the problem with the voluntary carbon market is that these uncertainties about the quality of the credits, the quality of the environmental benefits that those credits are designed to reflect, have, many people believe, prevented the markets from growing, right? There also are no regulatory mandates. Generally, there have been very few mandates that would have required companies to buy these offsets. But the point is, if you could build a better carbon credit using blockchain technology, the idea is maybe some of these concerns about the environmental integrity of the credits, the concern about fraud, the concern about just unintentional mistakes in the underlying environmental projects, maybe that could be mitigated.
Yeah. So from what you're saying, it sounds like there's concerns about the validity of a lot of these credits, because whether they're actually they actually came from work that hold carbon out, whether it's like some activity, like, I don't know if it's like planting trees or cleaning up in terms of, or I guess donating to a foundation. And so there's need for a better way to track these credits. And why is that impacting the growth of the market? Who's essentially saying that these credits aren't worth what they are, what you purchased them for, and therefore kind of stifles the market from continuing with activity? Because I would assume that's kind of some of the behaviors that are impacting, which is just not trusting the market or having bad actors and things like that. But yeah, what else, I guess, impacts the market to not be growing, and how does this help? How does this vehicle actually help it grow?
Sure. So one of the things I've learned in entering this blockchain space is that many of my colleagues and friends in my organization and others, there's gripped with so much enthusiasm, and I love being around it. But as a trained DC lawyer, skepticism is sort of part of my makeup. And I'm always wondering why folks think that blockchain solutions are going to solve as many problems as their advocates think they're going to solve, right? And there's obviously some degree of exuberance and some of the claims that well-meaning people make in this space. But the truth is that there weren't a lot of good existing solutions to fix some of the perceived problems in the carbon markets, right? Blockchain actually introduces, for what I take to be the first time, a way of building tools, not just to communicate clearly the chain of custody of these credits, right, on the blockchain, but also to build applications on chain, right? For example, on Hedera, that add functionality. And so one of the things that my company does, the HBAR Foundation, so we invest not only in sustainability projects. We have 4 fund verticals: the metaverse, crypto economy, fintech. But most of my time as the head of policy is spent on the Sustainable Impact Fund. So that's a $100 million fund. And so we've been investing in companies. So may have had some of the founders of those companies on your podcast, or maybe you should, because they're great companies. But companies that want to use the Hedera network and the tools that we've built with our investee partners to improve the carbon markets. That's been one of our main priorities, right? And so one such company is Envision Blockchain, right? So they've been helping us build a tool that we call the Guardian, which does a number of different things, but it's one of its most exciting applications is to help create carbon credits that are auditable, right? And so what this means basically is that the metadata associated with the underlying project is built into the asset itself, the digital asset, right? So think of it, you raised the example of forestry projects. So there are a lot of ways to do carbon removal, right? You can do carbon removal with what they call nature-based projects and also technology-based solutions. And so a famous example, or in the news frequently example of a technology-based solution is direct air capture. So big machines pull carbon out of the atmosphere and mineralize it in the bedrock. There are some high-profile companies like Climeworks that are doing great work in that space. But that's very expensive. The cost right now, anyway, per ton of carbon removed is beyond the budget of many companies that want to buy credits. The advantage of those technology-based solutions is that carbon, once mineralized into the bedrock, is there forever for the most part, right? If you're planting trees, those trees are also very good at fixing carbon from the atmosphere. The problem is that trees can burn down, they can be cut down, they can die, right? And so we don't know without more work if a piece of paper that reflects some number of acres of trees planted or purports to reflect that, we don't really know just by looking at the paper if those trees are still standing, right? Or if the right kind of tree was planted for that part of the world, or the carbon project developer that's doing the tree planting has all of the different sort of wraparound apparatus installed to ensure those trees the growth is monitored and reported accurately and verified, right? And so what our work with Vision Blockchain and their Guardian product is designed to do is create an auditable carbon token, to mint a carbon token that isn't just a piece of paper tethered to some database somewhere where someone has manually entered information about that state of trees, if we're using a forestry example, but rather something more like if you'll go to Zillow and if you're looking for real estate, you want to know a lot more about the potential home or condo that you're going to buy and simply how many square feet there might be. You want to know precisely where it's located. You want some great photos. You want to know how many bathrooms, and you want to do all of the title search and so forth that often you have to hire lawyers to go to the county courthouse to do that for you. If you could have it all just in one spot, it's going to be much easier and much faster and more efficient to buy that credit and be confident that it is reflecting a great project. And so what this does is it takes innovations in lots of different spaces and brings them together, right? And so if you have remote sensing capabilities, Internet of Things, right? You embed those sensors in the stand of trees, right? Cameras, and you can tether those cameras to the carbon credit that you mint on chain, in our case, Hedera, right? And you can get regular pings. So you open up, and I think one of our challenges is going to be working on the front end of this. So it's easier to access for lawyers like me and not just the excellent sort of blockchain experts that I work with. But the goal is to have ultimately a carbon offset product that you can just click into and see all the relevant information to assure you, if you're a corporate buyer, that what you're buying is high quality, all the different MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification apparatus that needs to be installed around the project has been installed, that the project has been verified, and it follows a scientific methodology that everyone in the industry would approve of, right? So that's one example of a project that we've spent quite a bit of time investing and working together with our partners on.
Well, it's incredible to see that there is such a need to validate these credits, but also it makes me think about who's auditing these credits to say that they're worth less value. So I'm a company that's purchased a credit. It was based on this activity, a carbon extraction activity, but then for some reason that no longer exists. So does that mean my credit is no longer valid, and who dictates that?
Julian, you're asking hard questions. I love it. And what that sort of means is that I won't have a good answer because there isn't a good answer. This sustainability ESG world is exciting for precisely this reason. To me, exciting to me because there's so much room.
Wild Wild West.
Wild Wild West. Well, it's not as much the Wild Wild West as it used to be. And I think a lot of the tough media criticisms of the carbon markets have been maybe too tough and haven't reflected all the good work that's being done. But there is 100% room to add value, right? So to answer your question directly, I think the truth is that if your stand of trees burns down in the industry, we call that a reversal, an environmental reversal. But a credit reflecting the carbon pulled down from the atmosphere by those trees has already been issued, purchased, and retired by a company on one of the carbon registries. It's not clear at this moment, there is a infrastructure in place to ensure that company who has purchased that credit and gotten credit for the environmental benefit has to do anything more than that. And that's a problem, right? It's a problem without any easy answers. There are a lot of smart people working hard to develop policy solutions to that problem. But keep in mind, we're doing it largely in the absence of government regulation of the space.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So having been in government and worked on environmental regulatory matters, I can say that I'm certainly not an opponent of smart regulation. But in many instances, you have, if not over-regulated spaces, you have complexity to the regulatory environment. It makes compliance very hard, very, very costly, right? As a sort of trained lawyer who works in the subject matter space, sometimes I would open up I pull up the reg on the internet and struggle to understand what it means that I'm closer to it than most, right? And so the answer might not be entirely to replicate the sort of top-down regulatory models that we use in other environments, but it is challenging without governments in multiple jurisdictions coming together and harmonizing their rules and setting rules to ensure that there isn't a way for companies to, not that they would necessarily do this intentionally, but to navigate around these requirements, right? Sure. Sometimes we call that greenwashing, right? Mm-hmm. Greenwashing is the sort of pejorative we use to suggest that a company is just trying to get good PR, right? Yeah. It means more than that. It means that they have, whether intentionally or inadvertently, they have communicated to their stakeholders, and that may be to their regulators if they're a publicly issued company, or their customers, or their employees, that they have been successful in a way that they haven't been successful, because being successful in reducing our environmental impacts is hard, right? And so it's exciting to think about ways to use DLT to build tools that will make success easier to attain, less expensive to attain, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many questions I think we could go on and on about, at least for me, and how you qualify these credits and who kind of validates it or verifies that. What's the timeline for when you can retire these, if you can extend that timeline? I mean, there's probably so many questions we could dive into, but I'm curious, based on just shifting our focus back to HBAR and what you're working on, describe to us a little bit more about what's been the success so far, and how do you measure success as a company who's structured in your way? Is it the amount of projects that you're working on? Is it the growth of those projects in terms of the adoption of companies? Yeah, give us a little bit more insight of where you've gone to now and what's particularly exciting about the next frontier.
Sure. So as I said, the HBAR Foundation is a spinoff from Hedera. So the Hedera network is our proof of stake, not technically a blockchain, but close enough. It's our DLT network, our layer one. And it is unique, or at least it had been unique. I think there's some great innovation going on by other chains, but it is extraordinarily low energy, right? So one of the big environmental criticisms when I was working with Coinbase, for example, was that everyone in this space was harming the environment, right? Proof of work, it was one of the sort of easiest targets, of course, but I think our industry was, because it was relatively new, wasn't cut any of the slack that sort of legacy industries had been. And the focus had been in almost every other New York Times article about the space that it's the last straw for the environment is these blockchain companies, right? All of that I think is worth talking about, perhaps a bit exaggerated. But when I discovered the Hedera network, I was amazed at how little impact really operating the network involved. We've had a variety of different outside validators look at our energy consumption, and that a Hedera transaction is significantly less energetically intense than a Visa transaction, for example, right? So the traditional financial world is behind where we are. And there are a lot of other ways of benchmarking our energy consumption, but low energy, I think, is sort of indisputable. We're also very fast and high throughput. We can handle lots of transactions per second, and it's very inexpensive. And so we've set the Hedera Governance Council has set pricing for activity on the network in a very accessible way. So we want people to build on Hedera. We're sort of positioned ourselves as the network for enterprise. We want to see actual utility, and nothing against meme coins, but that's not what we're about. We're about solving business problems using this technology. And if we win, right, if we're successful, we fade into the background, right? That's ultimately what success looks like. We're not talking about the fact that it's Hedera or that it's a blockchain tool or a DLT tool. It just works, to borrow a phrase from Apple. And the sort of the regular folks on the street don't particularly care that it is a DLT based solution or a DLT enabled solution. But that's a bit of a ways off. Right now, the HBAR Foundation invests in companies that are building the network, and we use fairly standard metrics, transactions on the network, time to mainnet. We want activity on the network. That, I think, is what my fantastic exec team at the foundation wants to see. From my perspective as head of global policy and one of the leaders of the Sustainable Impact Fund, I want to see more than that. I want to see the building of tools that are calibrated to solve problems in this voluntary carbon market space, in the ESG reporting space. And we could, as you said, we have a whole nother podcast all about what those problems are. And I could bring some of our fantastic colleagues on to talk about the solutions in greater detail, greater technical detail than I'm able. But the bottom line is we are changing markets outside of blockchain, outside of DLT, using our tools. And what success looks like is a carbon market that starts to grow much more quickly, carbon pricing that starts to rise. So one of the things we did talk about before is that carbon credits now, they vary in price depending on the underlying type of carbon removal involved, but they have been relatively inexpensive. And that works in the short term for companies who want to invest in offsets. But people who look at climate projections, the climate policy folks that ask the question, so how high do carbon prices have to be to reflect their actual impact? If you emit a ton of carbon, what do you have to pay to reflect the impact? And most people think that the prices need to be much higher. And so we get to higher carbon pricing with higher quality carbon projects. And by developing tools that allow us to communicate the environmental benefits that those products bring credibly, reliably, transparently, so the whole world can see. This isn't some sort of shady operation where we're selling snake oil. We're actually channeling private finance to climate action. We have more forestry projects, more soil projects, many other different types of investments. Biodiversity is getting a lot of attention now. How do you create markets that, so it's not this wouldn't necessarily be the carbon markets, but how do you inject money into the Amazon region, for example, to ensure that biodiversity that currently exists isn't lost, to incentivize indigenous people as land stewards to invest in not extracting, which is quite understandable that folks would want to do now, people want a good standard of living, but how do you create economic incentives to ensure that biodiversity is preserved? One of the biggest impediments to that is the lack of transparency and the inability to channel finance back to the folks that are doing that work on the ground. And so what really excites me and what will be success from my point of view is where our investee companies, our grantees, and that's one of the things I should know, we are a grant fund. So we operate very similarly to an impact VC, but for the time being, we are making grants. And in some instances, I think our grantee companies might be happy to go with the traditional VC model because we bring lots of benchmarking to the game in exchange for the grant. But what we're hoping these grantees will do is build these solutions that will raise the carbon price, will grow the market, will see investments made into parts of the world where there's deforestation and biodiversity loss and ecosystem destruction. And we see those environmental harms being mitigated. Yeah. So from an HBAR Foundation perspective, we want more great innovators building on Hedera, right? From a Sustainable Impact Fund perspective, we want that too, but we want to see concrete results in the environmental markets as a result of the tools that our partners are building. And we work with our partners to ensure that they are as successful as they can be. So one of my roles as head of policy is to help to sort of get in the trenches with founders and help them navigate around some of the challenging regulatory and policy obstacles that may hold them back.
And it's interesting. I was thinking about, is there a future where companies start to, it seems like all the activity happens after the fact. You purchase a credit after something has been accomplished and completed, but is there a future where the mechanics of this network allow companies to invest in these projects so that they accumulate these credits, and then at the end, it's not such a large cost, but maybe an accrued cost that they can distribute? I think of the active work, and it's all kind of preemptive investment. Does that already exist? Or if it doesn't, does this network allow it to exist?
So that's a great question. And if I understand you correctly, can companies do more than just offset their emissions, but can they invest in environmental protection using these tools and then also get credit for that?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. It doesn't happen now as much as we'd like to see it happen. But yeah, if we can develop tools that allow ESG reporting to be much more timely. So right now, the way it works for most companies, you issue an ESG report or a sustainability report on an annual basis, right? And so you have someone on your sustainability team in your company, or as is more realistic, usually a small team of people working to gather the data over the course of a year that you report once a year, right? That means most of the reports that you read are a year out of date. We want timely reporting on a regular basis, on a continuous basis, and we want to give stakeholder communities a way of sort of peeking into the sustainability team's work on an ongoing basis. So if we gave folks that ability, right, they'd get credit not just once a year, but on an ongoing basis. And when I say credit, I mean they're going to receive all of the public support for their good works that they deserve to receive. If we give the public a reliable way, credible way of transparently improving those efforts, right?
Yeah.
The theory of that case then is that people will want to invest more, right? I'm sure there are companies that will decide to invest their monies elsewhere, right? And from my point of view, anyway, it's important to distinguish between sort of pure philanthropic activity, right? This is not just companies just trying to do good. They're trying to remove strategic business risks from their operations. And by lowering their environmental footprint and communicating to regulators and communicating to stakeholders that you're doing that, it's our belief that in most cases, the company will perform better in the market as a result as well.
Yeah. I have a few FAQs for you, so I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions and then we'll see where we get. But first one I always like to open it up with is, what's particularly hard about your job day to day?
A couple things. On a personal note, I think post-pandemic, I'm just more extroverted than I used to be. And one of the great things about my team is that it is fully global. We are remote. And what that means is that we're on Zoom calls all day long, trying to coordinate with our partners. I don't think our business would be possible to conduct if we had one headquarters, and where would it be, right? Our teams are distributed all over the globe, but it is a challenge to jump into conversations like you and I are having with the enthusiasm that you want when one of my great colleagues is about to go to sleep and I'm just waking up. My time counts and so forth. But from a professional point of view, not just so that's the personal note. From a professional point of view, I think one of the biggest challenges is, especially recently, is the fear and uncertainty and doubt that we all feel in the blockchain space due to the regulatory environment. Now, we are not in the business of trying to replace the traditional financial system, especially in the sustainability world. We're trying to build solutions for sustainability and environmental problems. But colleagues I used to work with in DC, I think the folks working with blockchain have gotten a bad rap, right? And we all know how that bad rap happened. Prominent people doing no good in the space have made it more challenging from a messaging point of view.
Yeah.
But it's hard to convince people in the traditional environmental and sustainability communities sometimes who don't have the kind of familiarity with our work, perhaps that they should, that we're doing as much as we actually are. And also at the same time to bring down the level of concern that we're going to be shut down on the basis of regulation of the blockchain space that might be a little bit more aggressive. And from the perspective of someone who used to work in the DC regulatory world, I don't fault my old colleagues or their replacements in the Biden administration for taking a kind of strong position on blockchain regulation or on climate issues. But one of the sort of important types of work that we have to do in the space is to educate folks about exactly what we're doing and why it's not really a concern, at least from my point of view, but rather an opportunity to solve problems that the traditional top-down regulatory environment has struggled to solve.
Yeah. If you weren't working on this, what would you be doing?
Wow, you're going to threaten to send me into existential crisis there. Honestly, at the moment, I'm very happy, and don't give that question a ton of thought. There always is the possibility of getting pulled back into the world of traditional lawyering, working at a law firm, helping the companies solve these kinds of problems from the perspective of their outside counsel. I found that to be very rewarding. I also loved my time in government, and I could see a world in which I had an opportunity to go back and contribute there again. But honestly, if you look at the kinds of work that we're doing in the HBAR Foundation now, and the kinds of companies we're investing in, this is where the change and the impact is happening. And so hopefully we'll keep on doing it for quite some time.
Yeah. I guess to rephrase that, what's a product outside of something that you're involved in that you're particularly excited about or keeping an eye out or a fan of, that's whether it's adjacent to your space or not, that you are interested in?
You mean totally outside of climate or DLT? Yeah. I mean, I'm an avid user of the outdoors, and my wife will laugh if she watches this podcast, but companies like Arc'teryx that make fantastic outdoor gear. If they wanted a general counsel who got a great discount on the latest jacket or backpack, and I had to do some product testing out into the Alaskan backcountry, I could be tempted.
Might just have to do it. Last up thing, Jonathan, I always like to ask this question. What's something that's had a lasting impact on you, whether it's a book, whether it's a anecdote, a quote, or an individual? What's something that's had a lasting impact on you even today?
I mean, so many things. I'm old enough to have been influenced by lots of people. One of my first jobs out of college, before law school, I worked at the National Institutes of Health in the Department of Bioethics, and I worked under Zeke Emanuel, Rahm Emanuel's brother. He's a very prominent bioethicist and full of energy and exuberance. And there was a time when I guess I wasn't as talkative or as forceful as I should be. And I remember it as a straight up yell, told me not to be a shrinking violet, and then beep, 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 for sure the curse words that we're going to edit out. And it always stuck with me. And if you want to get things done, kind of charge ahead. And so I don't think many people accuse me of being a shrinking violet after that. So, thanks, Manuel.
Yeah. No, that was encouraging, I think, especially I'm sure when you're early in your career to have that individual that kind of helps you detach yourself from the, I guess, reactions from the environment that maybe impact your confidence or ability to move forward. But if you just ignore all of that and move forward, then oftentimes you'll find the success that you're looking for, at least in my.
Absolutely. Smart people I found, and this is one of my, sort of definitely one of my weaknesses. If you're good at analysis, you analyze yourself first, and you look at all of the things that people could say, perhaps accurately, to criticize your work. But if you spend all your time thinking about that, you don't ever get any work done. And so one of the lifelong projects is sort of to turn down the volume of that sort of self-talk and just forge ahead and hope for the best, right? And usually it works out.
Yeah. Last little bit, Jonathan, and I would always like to ask my guest, is there anything we left on the table? Any question I didn't ask you that I should have?
No, this was great. I love this conversation, right? I mean, the only challenge for you is that if you're tackling all of the ways that blockchain could accelerate climate markets, we did talk about energy markets. We didn't talk about traditional environmental challenges like water rights and all of the new ESG reporting rules that we're expecting from government agencies. And maybe we'll pick that up in some future conversation.
Absolutely. And where can we find you and be a fan of you? What's your LinkedIn? Where can we find and hear your voice and be a fan and support what you're doing?
I'm mostly on LinkedIn. You can find me with my name, Jonathan Rackoff, Rackoff. I do have a Twitter account, but honestly, a trained lawyer, that means tweet as little as possible. So I'm being told by many in my network, I need to be a little more vocal on Twitter. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Now LinkedIn. And also the HBAR Foundation maintains a blog. And so we put out some of our commentary in that venue.
Amazing. Jonathan, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you, not only discussing your career and what's been exciting about your journey, but also what the HBAR Foundation is working on, different projects that will have a lasting impact, not only for corporate and kind of the larger spaces, but even us as individuals. And it's exciting to see this kind of move into this cooperative network that really does incentivize everyone to be a good actor and participate. So ultimately excited to see what you guys will be working on. But thank you again for being on the show. I hope you enjoyed yourself today.
Thank you, Julian. It was awesome.
Of course.